Welcome to the Great Compromise podcast. I am Victoria the Democrat, and with me as always is GOP Jim. How are you, Jim?
Doing great, V. Looking forward to this.
Me too. This week our topic is raising the minimum wage. Why are we discussing this? It's been in the news a lot lately, and it hasn't been raised for a while. Should it be? Let's get into it. This week, I am for increasing the minimum wage. Increasing the minimum wage would reduce poverty and income inequality, as well as race and gender inequality. In 2014, President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors was led by Jason Furman, a PhD. He stated that the weakening value of the minimum wage is one of the important reasons for inequality at the bottom. This is entirely true. Our gap between the rich and poor has not been this wide since 1920. 63% of American workers receive minimum wage are women, despite the fact that women represent 47% of the U.S. workers. More than half work at minimum wage. So 17.7% of minimum wage earners are also African American, and 21% are Hispanic. Increasing the minimum wage would mean more equitable income distribution for women and minorities. Increasing the minimum wage would disproportionately benefit Black workers and reduce racial inequality. When so many people are working minimum wage jobs, which, as a reminder, is $7.25 an hour right now, as it has been since 2009, that is not enough to survive on. Secondly, a higher minimum wage would reduce government welfare spending. In 2014, the Center for American Progress released information stating that if the federal minimum wage was raised to $10.10 an hour, SNAP spending, or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program known as food stamps, would be reduced by 6%, or $4.6 billion. The Economic Policy Institute estimates that 1.7 million Americans would no longer be dependent on government programs if the minimum wage was $10.10 an hour. This would reduce annual government spending on a supplemental income program standard by $7.6 billion. The minimum wage has not kept up with inflation. Improvements in productivity and economic growth have outpaced increases in minimum wage, and it's not currently high enough for housing and essentials. In 2015, a report from the National Law Income Housing Coalition stated that in no state, none of the 50 states, can an individual work a typical 40-hour work week at the federal minimum wage and afford a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment for his or her family. If you were to work at $7.25 an hour, 40 hours a week for 52 weeks, your income would be $15,080. It is more expensive to be poor because you have higher interest rates, you cannot afford to buy in bulk or plan ahead, and preventing crises doesn't fit when your budget is paycheck to paycheck. So then you have more fires to put out when you haven't been able to change your oil or go to the doctor.
Thank you, Victoria. Now this week I am on the con side, and here's why. Increasing the minimum wage would force small businesses to lay off employees. The Congressional Budget Office projected that a minimum wage increase from $7.25 to $15 would reduce employment in the United States by 1.4 million. San Francisco's Office of Economic Analysis said that an increase to $15 would reduce the city's employment by about 15,270 private sector jobs. As explained by George Reisman, professor of economics at Pepperdine University, the higher wages are, the higher costs of production are. The higher costs of production are, the higher prices are. The higher prices are, the smaller the quantities of goods and services demanded and the number of workers employed in producing them. It's just common sense. Smaller businesses cannot afford to pay their workers $15 an hour. It comes down to them firing their employees or closing their doors, and both results are the same for the workers. 60% of small business owners say that raising the minimum wage will hurt most small business owners, according to the 2013 Gallup poll. Let's not force our small businesses to close. Also, raising the minimum wage would increase the price of goods. A 2013 article by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago stated that if the minimum wage is increased, fast food restaurants would pass on almost 100% of their increased labor costs onto consumers, and that other firms may do the same. NBC News found that the price of a cup of coffee went up by 10 to 20% in Oakland, California, after a 36% minimum wage hike in the city to $12.25. This is just a fact. When company costs rise, they will have to start charging more to compensate. This artificial inflation will essentially eliminate the benefits that raising the minimum wage might have. But that won't stop at goods. A new Heritage Foundation study finds that raising the minimum wage to $15 would increase the cost of childcare by 21%. Parents everywhere will be looking at thousands of dollars more a year in childcare costs, with the brunt of that cost coming down on single parents who don't have an option of whether to work or not. But maybe most importantly, the free market should determine minimum wages, not the federal government. Supply and demand should always be the determining factor. If a business is doing well, they can charge more for their product and in turn pay their employees more to attract better talent. And of course, competition between businesses will also keep the cost of products down and not wages because they still need to be competitive. This system works when we let it. Trying to interfere will only hurt the lower and middle class.
Thank you for your points. What I am proposing is increasing the minimum wage incrementally. I think that going right from $7.25 to $15 an hour is too big of a hike. That would be felt too devastatingly by businesses. It would be more than doubling what the current rate is. So I think that's too steep a change. I know some people are advocating for changing it across the board to 15. But I think even going up as high as 9 would make a big difference. So just to get that out of the way.
Okay. Well, can I ask how incrementally?
I said up to 9.
I'm sorry, but how incrementally would you raise the wage? Like, you raise it to 9 now, but you're saying incrementally means eventually, like 2025, 2030. Like, is that what you mean, or just
I mean,
go
like
slow?
Going slow over a very long period of time.
Okay.
To increase it. It hasn't been raised in 12 years,
Mm-hmm.
which means that the minimum wage now gets you further than it did when it was first established as far as inflation goes. So
Say that again?
So if you're comparing like what the minimum wage is now
Mm-hmm.
and what the cost of living is, it earns you less than when the minimum wage was first established.
Okay, sorry, you said it takes you further now, so I just wanted to
Oh,
clarify.
I misspoke.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
No, yeah. So earning full-time minimum wage is like 15 grand a year.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even going to get you very far in the states where the cost of living is lowest. So it's just unreasonable everywhere.
Yeah, well, the Democrats, not to name any names, of course.
Or to generalize.
Or to generalize, that's what we do here. I'm generalizing, and I'm also naming names. A lot of the Democrats ran on raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say even Joe Biden agreed to that before he became president, of course.
Yeah.
And naturally, AOC was heading that to raise $15 an hour. So there is a movement to raise it sooner rather than later, that quickly, which it sounds like you would agree with me that would hurt small businesses.
I think that's too fast of a change.
Okay.
Yeah. But it does need to change because childcare, college, cost of goods, those are all going up. And they have been for a long time. And plenty of people are earning the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane to expect someone to have to work 3 jobs to provide for their family. That's no way to live. I think we need to be doing better for those people.
Yeah, in theory, that's true. It is. I just really dislike the idea of a federal minimum wage to be a coverall for every state in America, because the cost of living in Mississippi is not the same as it is in California, as it is in New York, as it is in New Hampshire. These are all different costs of living. So having one blanket minimum wage doesn't really work. It needs to be, at minimum, left up to the individual states to choose whether or not to raise it. Ideally, we leave it up to, again, the free market. And if businesses want to hire employees, they pay well enough. And if they can't, then they just don't get good employees, don't get many employees. It is what it is.
And how is that going for us, Jim? Because we haven't changed it in 12 years.
It's working.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
The number of people living on the poverty line has increased. The number of people
Since COVID?
Since
We're
the
talking
minimum wage
pre-COVID.
has been increased. Of course, since COVID.
Yes.
COVID is something no one could have expected, or
Sure. With COVID aside, pre-COVID.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is something that should have happened a long time ago. And studies show that when the minimum wage is increased, workers are not laid off. It's not a high correlation.
Says who?
There was a study that was done across a McDonald's across the whole country.
Okay, well, all right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
It's McDonald's can afford to pay anyone any amount of money, and they won't have to fire anybody because it's McDonald's. The raising the minimum wage won't hurt McDonald's. It won't hurt Walmart. It's going to hurt the mom and pop shop across the street. That's who I'm worried about. The backbone of America, the small business. McDonald's can pay whatever they want. So I'm not surprised if there's a study done about them and they didn't lay anybody off.
Right. Well, I'm reading it anyway. So McDonald's did a study at McDonald's around the country and found that in the states with a higher minimum wage, they didn't have any more automation or cut jobs. So in states where the minimum wage went up, the income of those workers already paid over the minimum wage also went up. The increase in wages came from a raise in prices, and workers were better off. Did it kill jobs? No. Other studies show this too.
Do you say the increase came in a raise of prices? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
So the cost of the food went up to compensate for the wage increase.
Right.
Okay. I'm glad you read that, actually, because that kind of proves my other point. The cost of goods is going to go up if we increase the minimum wage, which will be a kind of an artificial inflation, which means even if wages are going up, goods and services are going to cost more, so it kind of cuts out the benefit of raising wages.
But then what do we do because the cost of goods are already going up? Childcare has gone up, housing has gone up, food has gone up.
Mm-hmm.
How is anyone supposed to afford these increased prices if their wages are not going up?
It's tough out there. I know part of it is from COVID right now, but this was also the case pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the free market answer is to find a better paying job, unfortunately. And I know that is easier said than done, but I don't have a better answer.
Well, people need a better answer, because what about that woman who doesn't have an education, is trying to provide for her kid, and she's a single mom, and welfare benefits are not perfect. They actually have plenty of requirements, like you don't qualify for government assisted childcare unless you have a job, but you can't apply for a job or do a job interview when you don't have anyone to watch your child.
Right.
So something needs to change. a lot of things actually need to change, but we need to make it easier to bring in a living wage, especially for people who are supporting children.
This is a little earlier in the episode than I typically like to agree with you, but I think states should take a look at their current minimum wage levels individually, not the federal level, and determine whether or not to raise it on their own. I think for some states, yes, it needs to go up. $7.25 is a relic of the past, and raising it a little bit wouldn't hurt the economy.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. So, in some regard, we agree a tiny bit, just a tiny. But I want to remind you about a study from the Heritage Foundation I read about earlier, where increasing the minimum wage to $15 would increase the cost of childcare by 21%, which would disproportionately hurt single parents. So if we don't raise it, they're hurt. If we raise it too much, they're hurt. So it's a fine line, and it's got to go up a little bit, but obviously not $15, and I think we agree there.
Yeah, we do agree that doubling it is going to have some pretty serious repercussions because it doesn't give businesses the time to create space for that in their budgets. Just doubling it would bring a lot of people to their knees.
Right. But ideally, I'd let the free market handle it how it's being handled in most states right now, particularly New Hampshire, where we still have the federal minimum wage level here. It's if businesses want to attract better talent, they will pay more. It's exactly like that. It's just that simple. I mean, it should be anyway.
And I wish it were, but plenty of people out there can tell you that it's not from their lived experience.
And some could. And I guess that is the argument.
I guess so.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Great Compromise podcast. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and we will see you next week.